Now that you have at least a functional understanding of the game, it's time to talk about another huge portion of Crusader Kings 3 that deserves a video all unto itself. Succession laws and titles. If you are struggling with other general mechanics, you can find my Starting Your First Campaign guide linked in the upper right corner. But at this point, you've probably gotten a few years under your belt, or maybe you've burned through a few campaigns learning the mechanics. Your character is starting to get old, and your heir is getting ready to inherit the throne. But you're probably unsure of who gets what, as the tutorial for the succession laws is not very clear cut. In this video today, we're going to discuss the importance and hierarchy of titles because they play a huge part in the other portion of our video, how to deal with succession. There are 6 total succession laws to choose from, and honestly, they're very confusing as the examples in the game are just not so clear cut. I'm going to show you the live examples using Robert Guiscard, the Duke of Apulia, and his sons on how the first 3, Confederate Partition, Partition, and High Partition work. The latter 3 I feel are pretty self-explanatory, but I will absolutely give them a once-over so that you understand everything from the ground up. I've added chapters into the timeline if you'd like to jump to the point of the video that's pertinent to you, or to see if it's even the right video for you to watch. I want you to be able to get back to playing Crusader Kings 3 as fast as possible. If you do decide to pick the game up after watching this, please feel free to use my link in the description. I do get a lovely commission, but as of the creation of this video, there is a 12% discount, and you'll get a Steam key that you place directly into Steam. But let's get started with discussing titles, and we'll be using Rurik, the ruler of Novgorod, to start us out. The map in Crusader Kings 3 consists of a series of counties that then make up larger and larger portions of the map. So right now I'm going to go over how those titles progress upwards. So the very bottom level is a barony, or what is typically ruled over by a mayor, something of the sort. Then those individual holdings make up the individual county. The county is then ruled over by a count, whatever your culture's version of a count is. In this case, we get chieftain. Now, there are multiple counties that make up a duchy, and then there are multiple duchies that make up a kingdom, multiple kingdoms that make up an empire, and then a corresponding name for each one, duke, king, or emperor. Now, if you really get confused and you don't know who is what or what on the map, just go ahead and click any character that is landed, and by landed I mean that they hold some form of rank and have a title. If you hover over this right here, it'll say the progression. Barony at the far bottom right, all the way over to empire on the left. And like I said before, every single culture has their own name for whatever that specific rank is. So again, this is a chieftain, which would most likely be a count with anyone else because it is a county rank realm. It again, depends on the culture. So why that is so important is because those titles dictate how your succession is going to work, because you have to know that your succession and the succession that goes down to your children will then depend on whether or not those individual titles create separate autonomous factions. And basically the rule of thumb is if someone is of equal title and in a succession scenario, and I'll exemplify this later, they become their own faction. So here's a really good example. I can create a title here. We can create the Duchy of, and I apologize for the mispronunciation here, of Duchy. We're going to click this, and then we're going to create the title. Now, because I'm a duke, I can have multiple what is called ducal titles of the duke. 1, 2, 3 right now. If I were a king, this would be limited to 2. That's important to note. But I also, if I look in the upper right corner, I'm above my holdings limit, my domain limit. So I'm going to give one of these titles, these titles of duke, to another character. And I'll just find someone here. Maybe I can do her. Nope. Here, this guy will work. It doesn't really matter. We're just showing an example here. So I'm going to give him the chiefdom of Duchy, which will make him a count. But I'm also going to give him the jarldom, which will make him a jarl, which is in turn a duke. Grant the title. Now watch what happens here. So Constantine becomes independent due to their tier now equaling yours. So he no longer is going to be a vassal like he would if he was just simply a count or a chief. He is now going to become his own jarldom because he's becoming a duke, which is equal title to myself. It even warns you down here. You press the button and it warns you ahead of time. So boom. And now you can see the highlighted area no longer includes this jarldom because he is now independent of me. But let's take a look at what happens in this scenario if I am king. So we've loaded back in here. I now have the jarldom of Luki right back in me. So we're going to create the kingdom first of Novgorod. And we've got all the necessary accoutrements. We're going to create the title. And we're good to go. I am now a mighty king. This is important because I no longer have to worry about creating the duchy, which we're going to do like we just did before. We've created it. That's not going to increase our domain limits because we're adding a title, but we still need to give away that domain. Now, we don't need to give away the entire jarldom. We just need to give away a single duchy. So again, we'll just choose someone, grant the title, and I could simply press the chiefdom of Luki and be totally fine. You can see your new domain size here goes to 404. Unselected, it's 504. But if I make him a jarldom, or a jarl in this case, a duke, no issue. He because I am above him as far as title goes, I maintain him as a member of my realm, of my kingdom. And that's really important for what we're about to talk about now as we jump over to Robert Guiscard and talking about how succession works depending on your rank as the ruler and the ranks and titles that you'll be handing over to your children. So let's jump over to that. With Robert Guiscard here, we have a number of duchy titles at our disposal, and he is the leader of Apulia. Now, if I click Robert here on the lower left, I'll get all of the titles that this character currently has. And I can see here that he's got 5 county titles that are spread throughout the land. And in addition to that, he also has 4 ducal or duchy titles: Apulia, Calabria, Sicily, and Salerno. And what's important about these is, remember the hierarchy we talked about? Well, that's going to determine how things are going to be split up with your succession laws. So let's go ahead and press F2 and bring up our realm. Then we're going to go ahead and press succession, and we can see our type of succession law our succession law, as well as our gender law, our designated heir or our primary heir, if there is one, then the amount of confederation or the amount of titles going to that heir, as well as titles lost on succession, 5. Now this is important because this is telling us that because of our succession law, we're losing 5 of our 9 titles, and they're going to our other heirs, our other children, because that is how Confederate partition works. And we're going to break that down in just a second here. So we can see that Roger de Hauteville is going to be getting the Duchy of Calabria and the County of Rossano, and Guy de Hauteville is going to get the Duchy of Sicily, the County of Agrigento, and then the County of Syracuse. Now, your succession law, I press change here, can only be influenced depending upon 2 things. For one, your level of crown authority, and everyone starts at level 1, so autonomous vassals. And as you progress up to limited, high, and then eventually absolute crown authority, you are then allowed to change your succession laws. And again, it depends upon other mechanics. And that other mechanic, if I hover over any one of these, it'll say your Norman culture does not have the hereditary rule innovation. So we're going to close this menu and then this menu, and we're going to bring up our innovations down here. And I can see hereditary rule is one of the civic innovations in the early medieval period for the Normans. Clicking high medieval, we get heraldry, which is the next one, which enacts, it says right there, high partition and house seniority, these 2 right there. And then our last one is for primogeniture, which is going to give us the primogeniture law, and then the ultimogeniture law, which we'll go over in just a second here. So bringing back up our character, that's not the right button, the character. And then our succession laws, we've got multiple heirs and single heir laws. And the top three I find are the ones that you're going to probably be the most confused with. So let's go over those first. The first one, Confederate partition, is the one you'll probably be starting out in, unless you are another faction that has, say, the Scandinavian elective, in which case you are going to be choosing your heir through an election. But for Confederate partition, let's read the text. Under Confederate partition, your titles, those 9 titles on the left, will be divided equally between your children. New titles may be created for your younger heirs. And we have to read this next part to really get a little bit more of a frame of reference. Upon succession, all titles held by the late ruler will be divided amongst their eligible children, with the player heir, which is in this case is Beaumont, always being given the primary title, the realm capital, and any direct de jure titles associated with it. So the primary title in this situation is the Duke of Apulia. And then he would get the realm capital, which is, well, the Duke of Apulia. And then any associated de jure titles after that. So with Confederate, though, everything is just split evenly. And if you have any titles that are not created, so for example here, let's say that I did not create the Duchy of Salerno, then the game will create the Duchy of Salerno for you to then give to another heir. So any titles that have not been created by your own choice, the game is going to create to then give. And then it will go down the line handing out titles. And the way that that works is it's going to look at your oldest holding, your oldest title, which in this case is going to be the Duchy of Apulia, and it is going to give it to your oldest son. So basically it's going to work chronologically in order of age of your children. So again, just to kind of push that example into the light here, the Duchy of Apulia was the first duchy I owned, followed by the Duchy of Salerno. The Duchy of Salerno was then given to Beaumont at his early age. So he retains the Duchy of Salerno, and he is granted the Duchy of Apulia, as well as the corresponding regions for both. So he gets the County of Apulia, which is the capital of the Duchy of Apulia, and also the County of Salerno, the capital of the Duchy of Salerno. Now, for Roger and for Guy, they will receive the next set of titles in order. And the next title would be a Duchy of Calabria. And since Roger here is my second oldest son, he would receive my second oldest duchy. And then further down here to my third oldest duchy, going to my third oldest son. And then it takes a look at the remaining counties and divides them up if there's any left over, so on and so forth. But let's just say, for example, I had 9 titles and 9 male heirs. And I say male because my gender law is male preference. Gender law, I think, is very self-explanatory, so I won't really go into it. But essentially, you just would choose how these, what is considered an heir is essentially the gender law. Now, if I had 9 male heirs and 9 titles, then they would just be divided from oldest living heir to oldest held title all the way down. Everyone would get one of these. So Beaumont would receive the Duchy of Apulia, and then let's just say Bob would receive the County of Salerno. Now, one final example here is, let's say I had 10 children and 9 titles. Well, the game will then go, okay, we're going to divvy out all 9 titles as necessary, and it will look at your newest title, which is in this case, or I'm sorry, your newest and lowest title, which is the County of Salerno, and it will then say, okay, I'm going to now give a barony to that 10th child. Now, why this is so important is that when I die, this doesn't mean that the land of Apulia still maintains its cohesion. Nay, it divides now into 3 separate territories. It's going to have Apulia, and Salerno will be the main primary one that I will now take over because Beaumont is my primary heir. But then Roger de Hauteville and Guy de Hauteville will both take over their own autonomous independent lands. And they will also, if I click on Roger, have full claim upon each other's lands. So it causes a pretty bitter and crazy civil war with the ones that are in good favor with one another against the ones that they don't like. So it's a pretty dangerous scenario. So this is why Confederate partition is very dangerous, because you're going to be creating titles that you didn't have before if you chose not to create them. And you're also going to have titles that are going to go to characters that you now have to deal with that you didn't have before. Like, again, those baronies or those mayors. Swinging back to our succession laws, the other two, partition, is exactly the same as Confederate partition, except for you will no longer be creating new titles. That's the big difference between these two. So everything that I said for Confederate, it's the same thing for partition, except you're not creating new heirs. So if you've got 10 kids, then 9 of them are going to get the titles. Now, moving to high partition, we get a different set of rules. Under high partition, succession, the lion's share of titles will go to your heir. The rest will be divided between your children. So what this really means here is that 50% of your titles are going to go to your primary heir, in this case Beaumont, and the rest will go to Roger and Guy. So it depends on how many total holdings that includes. So it's 50% of those holdings will be divided up. More than likely, it will go like this. So Beaumont will receive Sicily, Apulia, and Salerno. Roger will receive Calabria and maybe an extra county or two, and then the rest will go to Guy. Because it pretty much is going to go 50% to Beaumont, the rest to Roger, and then a little bit left over to Guy, because I've got 3 kids. If I had more kids, these titles might be divided a little bit more between the leftovers. But the nice thing about high partition is that the majority of those titles will be held by Beaumont, and that will mean that you just kind of have a lot more cohesion. But all of this really changes when we look at being a king. Before we swap over there, let me just talk real quick about single heir. It's very fast. Primogeniture just means that your oldest child inherits all of your titles. So all 9 of these titles would go to Beaumont. Ultimogeniture means that your youngest child would receive all 9 of your titles, in this case Guy de Hauteville. And then house seniority would mean it would go to your oldest living member of your house. So I think that's actually Robert Guiscard. So that kind of that covers all of our succession laws. And I know it is a little bit confusing, and I'm sorry if I lost you. I try to speak as fast as or as slow as I could so that it didn't get too mucked up. But let's jump over to what happens when you are a king in charge of a kingdom. In this scenario now, we are the king of Sicily, and we've created a kingdom. And our chief title is now king, as you would expect. So how does this work when it comes to succession? Well, bringing back up the Realms tab and going to succession, we can see that a lot has changed. Well, for one, in this part of the campaign, Beaumont is dead, and I want to talk about that. But in this scenario, we'll be getting the kingship plus the capital of the kingship, or the kingdom. Now, take a look at succession laws one more time. And this is something I didn't go over in the duchy portion. In all of these locations, Confederate, partition, and high partition, they all say the same thing. The player heir always being given the primary title, which in this case is king, the realm capital, which in this case is Apulia, and then the de jure titles associated with it, no matter, again, where we are in this list. So, what this really means for you is, if you create a kingdom and you are the king of that kingdom, there are a lot more things to manage, I will give you that, but in a succession scenario, your kingdom won't fracture into a bunch of different duchies. It will all remain one kingdom under one king who is your primary heir, in this case, Prince Roger. Prince Roger de Hauteville. Now, if I take a look at something else here, I see that I have got 2 ducal titles, Duchy of Calabria and Duchy of Apulia, and I am the king. But if I click this button and create the Duchy of Sicily, I'm going to have a 3rd title. And that 3rd title will change some things. So let me go ahead and create this title. And now look what happens. So we've created the title, and on the right side, my son, Roger, will take the Kingdom of Sicily, but he will only be the Duke of Apulia, and he will be the Count of Apulia as well as Salerno. Whereas my other son, Guy, will take the dukedom or the Duchy of Calabria and the Duchy of Sicily. So you can kind of work your way around this a little bit here. So let's go ahead over to Palermo, which is the capital of Sicily. We got to jump forward a little bit there. We were out of war. I forgot about that. So you're going to press this button after you've selected the capital of the respective duchy. And we're going to move the realm capital here. Now let me just bring up the realm tab and do this. So again, take a look at what is going to happen. We have got 4 titles that will be inheriting, while the other 6 are going to go to Guy. Press this button, move the capital, and right now, unpause that, and then get things going again. You can see that things just changed, didn't they? Now we're the King of Sicily and the future Duke of Sicily, and we retain all of the de jure titles attached to that. Now, Guy, on the other hand, is going to become the Duke of Calabria, and the Duke of Apulia. You can further kind of mitigate his holdings or what he has by, well, having more kids and changing your partition laws, or you can try and give this to another individual if you so wish. So, taking a look again at succession laws, right now, because we're at Confederate and we only have 2 male heirs, we're only going to be splitting these things in half for the most part. And because we've moved our capital down here to Palermo, we're now going to be given the king. We're going to be the King of Sicily, and we will retain, like I said, the Duke of Sicily, and we get all of the de jure titles attached to that. And he's already the Count of Salerno. So that gives him the ability to kind of own a little bit more land than his brother. Now, how I would deal with this Duke of Calabria situation is that I would simply grant it to my brother. Grant the title, and I'm going to give him the Duke of Calabria. Let's just grant that. Now, I get stressed because I'm greedy, but that's neither here nor there. Jumping back to succession, now Guy only receives the dukedom or the duchy of Apulia and the county of Apulia. So this makes it so that you don't have to deal with so many titles changing hands. And because we're King of Sicily, my brother will retain ownership of the Duchy of Calabria as an autonomous vassal, but he will always be a part of this kingdom. And when my character dies and he passes on the king title to my son Roger, he doesn't have to worry about as much land being weighed against him in any kind of claimant war. You do still have to deal with the fact that his brother, has a claim to all these titles, and it might still result in conflict, but at least this way he has less actual titles that are being passed to him. So hopefully this helps you with succession laws. There is a lot to deal with, but honestly it just comes down to really taking a look at Confederate partition is going to add new titles or create titles that were not created by yourself. Partition is going to divide everything equally. And then high partition is going to give 50% to the primary heir, of course, including the primary title and then the realm capital, as well as de jure titles. And then the rest gets divided up by your children. Trying to get to primogeniture as fast as you can is probably the most ideal way, because then everything just passes down to your oldest child, or one of these, which is your youngest child, or this, which again is your oldest member of your house. So if you have any other questions on succession law, go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Like I said, I know it can be very confusing, but just kind of keep in mind, as long as your hierarchy of your primary title is above that of the rest of your titles, your heir will just simply have that primary title and everyone will be a vassal under him, rather than an autonomous vassal that could possibly work against him. That's probably the biggest thing to know. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment below, all that kind of fun action. I will be doing a giveaway of Crusader Kings 3 on my streams this weekend. So if you do happen to be watching this and I'm streaming, jump on into the streams and maybe win a chance or get a chance at winning the game for free, so you don't have to buy it. Or give away the key to a friend, whatever you want to do. But you'll be able to see that on the channel. So if you subscribe, you'll be able to see that going on. But as always, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.